The sun had barely climbed over the horizon, casting pale golden light through the tall windows of Whitmore University's oldest lecture hall. Dust motes floated in the air like tiny stars, unnoticed in the quiet morning, except by one man who always noticed the little things, Gideon Price, the janitor. His hands were calloused, his back bent from years of work nobody thanked him for, but his eyes held a kind of quiet intelligence that went unnoticed by most. On that day, though, everything was about to change in a way that nobody could have predicted. Professor Adrian Harlow, the famed mathematician whose reputation could intimidate even the most confident students, strode into the room with his usual smug air. His tailored suit, sharp tie, and the faint scent of expensive cologne created a barrier around him, a mask of superiority he had perfected over decades. Today he carried a challenge, a problem so complex that he had used it as a sort of twisted social experiment. "Solve this equation," he declared loudly, "and I'll marry the woman of your choice." His voice echoed off the high ceilings, bouncing off the marble floors. There was a ripple of laughter from the students, incredulous and nervous, while a hush fell over the janitorial corner of the hall where Gideon quietly swept the floor. If you believe in kindness and second chances, if you believe that the heart can sometimes outsmart the mind, take a moment now to like, comment, share and subscribe to Kindness Spark. Gideon, who had spent most of his life on the sidelines, had always loved numbers. He wasn't a university graduate. He didn't have fancy certificates or letters after his name. He had, however, an intuition for patterns and an almost instinctive understanding of equations that had fascinated him since childhood. As Professor Harlow drew the complex symbols across the chalkboard, sneering at the thought of anyone outside his elite circle solving it, Gideon felt his pulse quicken. The janitor's hands paused mid-sweep, his eyes tracing the equation with a mixture of curiosity and quiet determination. Most people wouldn't have dared approach a professor like Harlow, whose temper was as infamous as his brilliance. But Gideon didn't see arrogance. He saw a puzzle waiting to be solved. He wiped his hands on his worn coat, cleared his throat softly, and stepped forward. "Excuse me, Professor," he said, voice low but steady. "I believe I can solve this." The room went silent. Laughter, previously loud and mocking, died in the air. Students exchanged nervous glances. Even Harlow froze, one hand clutching a piece of chalk, his mouth half open. The professor's laughter had always been his weapon, his shield. "You, a janitor?" he said, incredulity dripping from every word. "This is a problem for minds like mine, not yours." But Gideon didn't flinch. He didn't need approval or recognition. He simply stepped closer, chalk in hand now, and began to trace lines, making calculations with precise, fluid movements. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. The sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the hall with harsh light and illuminating Gideon's focused expression. Students whispered in awe as they watched the janitor unravel the complicated symbols, converting chaos into clarity. Harlow, meanwhile, was rooted to the spot, his amusement fading, replaced by disbelief, shock, and finally a grudging respect that he could barely admit to himself. When Gideon finally stepped back, the equation complete, the chalkboard now held a solution so elegant it was almost poetic. The room was silent, a heavy, suspended moment where nothing moved except for the faint sunlight dancing across the wooden floors. Then, slowly, Professor Harlow's jaw tightened. The laughter that had once been his armor evaporated, replaced by a cold, stunned realization. The janitor, someone he had underestimated, had solved it. It wasn't just the correctness of the answer, it was the way Gideon had approached it. He hadn't merely solved the problem, he had respected it, worked with it, understood it as something alive rather than a weapon for prestige. And that truth, subtle yet profound, resonated in the room. The students erupted, some in cheers, others in stunned silence, while Gideon returned to his broom, smiling faintly but humbly. Harlow, however, remained frozen, staring at the board, staring at Gideon, unable to process what had just happened. Pride had kept him strong for decades, but pride was fragile when confronted with genuine brilliance that came from humility, patience, and heart. Over the following weeks, Gideon's life began to change in ways he had never imagined. Invitations to lectures, conversations with students seeking mentorship, and even offers for scholarships poured in. But Gideon didn't seek glory. He continued to sweep the hallways, tending to the overlooked corners of the university, teaching quietly when asked, guiding patiently without ever taking more than necessary credit. His life had always been about the small acts, the tiny ripples of kindness that no one noticed. Until now, the ripples had grown into waves. Professor Harlow, on the other hand, struggled. The man who had always controlled the room, who had always been the center of authority, now faced a truth that shook him to his core. He had always believed knowledge was a shield, a fortress, but Gideon's quiet confidence and natural wisdom revealed the hollow center of arrogance. And yet, there was an unusual tension. Harlow felt a growing admiration for the janitor, mixed with guilt and a strange sense of inspiration he hadn't known in years.